Welcome to Fantasy Smack Talk, Week 15. Just going to be me today. Brent is still on his honeymoon, but he will be back for next week's show. Before we get into it, though, if you're already out, you're looking for something fun to do, go ahead and join the FanDuel Leagues, FST 2014. Use that promo code. It's the same sign-up bonus that you'll get everywhere else. They're a lot of fun. Do some of the daily leagues. Just looking for something else to root for. Tip for you before we get into it, though. This time of year, this will happen every once in a while where you could use this tip. It doesn't happen a ton, but every once in a while someone will get lazy with their team, even during the playoffs, and they maybe aren't, necessarily making sure they have, protection on their bench in case one of their players doesn't hurt, or they're not necessarily looking at their best defensive matchup. If you got all your teams set up for this week, next week, you're looking good, and you still got maybe one or two roster spots that you could play with, take a look at the team you're playing and see, if there's someone, sometimes there can be someone on the wire that you would be more worried about them playing against you than who's on their team currently, especially defenses. If there's like the Giants out there or something and they haven't adjusted their defense for the week, go ahead and pick them up even if you don't plan on playing them just so they can't play against you. Like I said, it doesn't come into play a ton, but every once in a while owners will get lazy and you can do this tactic. Let's get into the forum questions. The first one comes from the Sid. Which wide receiver are you going with? You got Kenny Stills at Chicago, or two Philly receivers, Jordan Matthews or Jeremy Maclin, going up against Dallas. I like anyone in the Philly-Dallas game. That could definitely be a shootout. You could kind of say the same for the Chicago-New Orleans game, but it's at Chicago, Monday night. It could be cold. We'll see what the weather's like. I don't know if the conditions are necessarily going to be the best for throwing. I would definitely take a look at the weather report, but I think I'm going to stay away from that game, especially since Stills is such boom or bust type guy. I think out of the three, Maclin's definitely the safest here, and he still has a decent upside. I think I would go with Maclin here. We got one from Sir Benel21. We got a quarterback question. Eli Manning versus Washington, Phillip Rivers versus Denver. This one's kind of tough. You got to think that, San Diego might need to throw a decent amount to keep up with Denver, but Denver's been running the ball a lot more lately, and Denver gets a lead, they could just control the clock, so that's a little scary. Rivers hasn't been that great. It's scary putting your playoff life in Eli Manning's hands, just because you're not necessarily sure which Eli's going to show up from week to week, but I'm going with Eli here, going up against terrible Washington defense. They're at home, the Giants are. Eli already carved up the Redskins once this year, so I'm going Eli. I know it's a little scary. For our last question, Sonic Fury, which running back? Latavius Murray at Kansas City, Ryan Matthews versus Denver. Matthews is a little banged up right now, and I would let that kind of determine this one. If the reports are decent on Matthews, I think you still need to go with him. Murray's looks decent, but I just trust Matthews just a little bit more in terms of just the safer play. Murray always can bust that big one, but I don't necessarily want to bank on that when you're 1 week away from the championship. So I think Matthews is a little safer as long as he's seems healthy. Let's get into those dud sleepers and deep sleepers. We'll start with mine. My dud's going to be Russell Wilson going up against San Francisco. That game for me just has 17-13 written all over it. I just don't really see a ton of points in that game. Obviously, Wilson can do some stuff with his legs. He's coming off a monster game. But he played San Francisco a couple weeks ago. It wasn't that impressive of a performance in terms of, fantasy points. If you have another decent option, I'm probably benching Wilson this week. But, in some situations, you're probably still starting him. But I'm not super excited about him, mainly because I just don't see a lot of points in that game. My sleeper is going to be Martavis Bryant for the Steelers. That Atlanta Steelers game could definitely be a shootout. And it's in Atlanta, it's on the road, which you don't necessarily like, but it's going to be in a dome, it's going to be a controlled environment, and for a speedster like Bryant, I actually like that. I think the chances of him having another long catch are definitely there. And then my deep sleeper is going to be Cole Beasley for the Cowboys. Like I said earlier, that game could definitely be high scoring. And Terrence Williams has been a disappointment. He was supposed to be the receiver that had the second most value out there with the Cowboys. Hasn't really worked. And they've been liking Beasley more and more. I think he's a decent play in deeper leagues. I don't mind Beasley this week. Let's take a look at Brent's picks. His dud's going to be Tennessee's defense. A hot waiver wire pickup because they're going up against the Jets this week. But Tennessee's a bad defense. So it's a bad defense versus a bad offense. I at least want a decent defense against a bad offense. So I'm with Brent on this one. I agree with this one. I like this pick. Tennessee, they're not a terrible play, but they're not worthy of how many leagues they've been picked up in. His sleeper is going to be Toby Gerhart. You got to figure he gets a bump with Denard Robinson being out, and they do like Gerhart in third down passing situations. And then his deep sleeper is going to be Wilson for the Bears. With Brandon Marshall out, Wilson's going to get more touches or more targets, so you got to like that potential. It could be needing to get in the shoot. They might be in a shootout with the Saints, depending on the weather. We'll see how the passing situations are out there, but he could definitely get some more targets. Let's get into Mike's picks. His stud's going to be Ryan Matthews. This is a situation to avoid if you can, if you have other options. Matthews is a little banged up. Denver isn't easy to run on, so Matthews' his upside this week isn't huge. His sleeper is going to be Chris Johnson. Johnson's been getting a little bit more looks, getting a few more carries, and an easy matchup against Tennessee, like I was talking about a minute ago. Chris Johnson hasn't looked that bad over the last couple weeks. He could be a decent play for you. And then his deep sleeper is going to be Dante Moncrief. He's got a decent matchup going up against the Texans. And he's been good. I mean, a lot like Bryant, he's got big play potential. He could have a big game for you this week as well. If you got any questions, post them in the forums. Like I said, Brent will be back later this week. He's not here. I guess I'll have to do pen flip and paper throw. Let's see how this works. Left-handed throw.